All right, I'm live, and I don't know if you can hear it, but I'm on the Austrian countryside, and just outside there's a church, and I hear the bell toll. So, for whom the bell tolls? I want to start with a little animation, and I want to say, as the pendulum swings back and forth, so trends come and go, but ultimately the pendulum settles down in the middle. And maybe pseudo trends, especially in tech, computing, front-end technology. Welcome to my session of serverless rendering. My name is Stefan Baumgartner. That's a photo of me from a different conference where we were still able to be together in one room. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm Dead Parrot. I have a blog called fatblog.eu. It has nothing to do with getting fit or eating too much or anything. It's a weird acronym, which I honestly can't remember anymore what I originally meant with that. And I'm the author of the TypeScript book. So there's a book out there called TypeScript in 50 Lessons. That's my book. It's a beautiful blue big book with 500 pages of digging deep into the TypeScript type system. And we are talking a lot about TypeScript today as well. But first, I want to give little history lessons, and not one of the boring ones, but one of the history lessons where you know where we are coming from, especially when we are doing something like rendering HTML. When you are a web developer, most of the things that you do is getting HTML out there in what form whatsoever, be it rendering a JSP page or an ASP page, or working with Angular, React, whatever. There are many ways of creating interactive UIs in the browser, and you can render it either on the server side or on the client side. So either produce the HTML already and send it with a response from the server over HTTP, or load JavaScript on the client, or we have seen today something like Blazor that uses some technology in between. But render things on the client and update the UI on the client without any connection to the server at all. And this is not only two sides of a coin, or two sides where the pendulum can swing to. There are trends attached to it. They go back and forth, just like I said in the intro. So it's always either the one thing or the other thing. Then the pendulum swings back to the server side rendering becomes a thing. Then it swings back to the client side, and client side rendering becomes a thing again. And the thing goes back and forth. And over the last, let's say, 25 years, we have seen the pendulum swing a lot of times. And I think we finally reached a point where the trend should be something we don't care anymore about. So, but rather something where we use the right tool for the job. And this is going to be the content of today. But before we start, a little history lesson. Let's swing the pendulum one time. Let's go to the server side. And when I started web development 20-something years ago, I used front page, my first Microsoft tool to get my websites into the internet. And what it basically was a UI, a WYSIWYG editor to design websites. You think of Word, but for websites. And if you have something like a navigation, a menu, or similar things, you had two options: either copy-paste it from the other pages, or WordPress was front page was going to assemble it for you. So you had some include parts where you could have reusable HTML parts that you share across your entire page. And this was nice. This was something where tooling did the job. But what you produced or what you put online was mostly just basic HTML. So it was a statically pre-generated website, static HTML. Cool thing, that works. That works since 25 years. Then my journey went into server-side includes, which was what front page did through a build or tooling process, but on the server side. So you had some little include snippets where you can, share your navigation. Maybe you have somewhere a script for news that produces a text file, and you include this text file. So you assembled little pieces and bits together when you request an HTML page. So this was one basically string concatenation task that you had running on, and some servers supported this. But still, all in all, this was still very static. You had the opportunity to split up your page and assemble it again, but no dynamic stuff at all. And one thing that is not as loved anymore as it was 20 years ago, which is PHP. And this was the traditional LAMP stack. This is the stack that still runs a majority of the websites out there. You have PHP as a personal homepage processor, so it was an extension to C servers, basically a template language in the beginning, but it evolved into its own programming language, where you were able to, connect to a database, retrieve data, render the data just by writing out some HTML, and have those little bits and pieces where you fill out the template. And boy, did this evolve! So this is one of those tech stacks that you don't recognize anymore today if the last line of PHP that you wrote was 20 years ago, especially if you look in those areas like Laravel, as a Symfony, the Zen framework. They have a layer on top of PHP that almost feels like Ruby on Rails, something similar. But it still has this undeniable beauty of having a very easy web server in the front. And I created an Apache as an example of a web server in this diagram, and then this simple web server kicking off little processes for each page that you visit. So there's not this one server that runs constantly, takes a request and produces output, but the server just relays, quote unquote, your request to a process that gets input and output and sends back the output. And with that, PHP has one feature that you don't find in, at least my understanding, in any other server-side technology, which is that if something goes wrong during one call, like if you call home.php and there's an error that just produces gibberish and garbage and nonsensical output, or even worse, some error code, the others might not be affected. So you separate your renderings per process, per PHP file that you have, and with that you are able to create highly dynamic websites to this day. So WordPress is, I guess, with around 40% the most distributed content management system out there, and it runs on PHP. And I spoke a lot about WordPress at Global Azure Bootcamp, and I didn't speak highly of WordPress at the Global Azure Bootcamp. But the underlying technology of PHP, as ugly as the programming language is, there's an undeniable beauty to it. This lightweight web server, these resilient processes that don't interfere each other, and just fetching data and producing HTML, that's nice. That's easy. That's accessible, and from an infrastructure point of view, that's there are a lot of nice things into that. So, and I spoke for a reason a little bit more about PHP. Now I want you to remember this diagram. It's easy. You can know what it does, but please remember it. So the pendulum, this was all server-side rendering, and now the pendulum swings a little bit into the middle, like going directly into client-side rendering with interactive UIs, and this is due to the rise of Ajax, asynchronous JavaScript, and XML, another Microsoft technology, by the way. So this was introduced to Internet Explorer 4 or 5, I can't remember anymore, where you had the possibility to send an HTTP request asynchronously. So not through a navigation step, but while a web page was running, use your JavaScript and fetch some data from somewhere. And back in the day, those were HTML fragments. So you were able to swap out content on the client side without doing a full navigation. And those contents could be of different different forms. So either something that has server-side data included, but also just some fragments. And the idea was that you send a static HTML page or an HTML page, and enhance the UI on the client side. So the UI becomes interactive, but still based on a very resilient server-side rendered page. This is also where the whole idea of progressive enhancement comes into that. Like, HTML is a good foundation. This is real what you get there, but you can have some nice interaction, some good user experience by sprinkling a little bit of JavaScript on top. And there was an art to it, that the JavaScript that you sprinkled on top did not break your entire website. So if something breaks there, because you were in a browser that nobody could understand, or a browser that was so exotic that you had no idea how the APIs work there, you still fell back to the original HTML. This was the heyday of jQuery, and this was where a lot of people found their passion for web development again, because up until then, web development was basically choosing a technology on the server side and sending HTML. Maybe you used some CSS, but front-end development was not this art or craft or field in our industry yet. Ajax and the rise of interactive UIs added a lot to that. And the pendulum swings further to the client side, and this is where client side applications come into play, and they're still there. So this is something that is still happening, and where people found out that JavaScript got more performant, more usable. Ajax was a big thing. Why not render everything on the client? Why don't we use those wonderful, nice JavaScript frameworks and do everything there? Rendering HTML, doing interactions. The backend is merely a data provider. You just get JSON payloads and render them on the client. The front end defines everything. And there have been tons of efforts in that direction. Backbone comes into mind, Knockout.js, tons and tons of frameworks, but AngularJS, I guess, the first version of AngularJS, not this atrocity Angular that we have right now, but the very first one made this hugely popular. Again, a very accessible JavaScript framework. It was easy to create client-side apps with that, and it was easy to get all the benefits from it. And I still think AngularJS made client-side applications really, really popular. And over time, this framework called React overtook. And for one simple reason, which you can see on the left side of the screen, you were able to write HTML inside JavaScript, and people frowned upon originally. But once you knew that this is not just HTML that you write, but rather like you see down there, simple function calls with a very well-defined interface, React.createElements. So this HTML, XML snippet up there translates roughly into something down there. You suddenly understood, no, it's not some weird HTML thingy there. It's the possibility to compose UIs by function calls. This is how the DOM, the document object model, should have looked like. And there's again an undeniable beauty to that. And also being able to compose, so collect lots of those function calls in a nice and accessible syntax into components and assemble those components. That's also something that you don't get in any other JavaScript framework in that way. And this is also one that opened up a door for a huge amount of new possibilities and technologies. And one of those is hydration. So we are going to see hydration in action in just a minute. But people found out over time that, well, you can render everything on the client side, but you have the problem that you transport a ton of JavaScript over the wire. And with a ton, I mean in multiple megabytes of JavaScript framework code. And then you have requests to the server for the data. And you need to assemble everything in the client. So from the point where you do the original request to get something from the server, like the resources, the JavaScript files and CSS files and whatnot, a lot of time can pass, especially if you are connected with one of those. And even as powerful as those phones are, you can always be in a spot where your internet connection is not that good, and this can happen even in the city. So I'm here with an LTE hotspot, which over the last 6 weeks I sadly found out that my internet service provider doesn't reach more than 2 Mbits per second at best. And most of the time I'm below 1 Mbit per second, and you can really feel that. So this is slow internet. You can have that in the big city. This can happen, and this is not something that you want. And then waiting for megabytes of JavaScript to transfer to the client side, so just that you can see your start screen. That takes ages, and so folks thought, okay, why not combine both? So you get some undeniable benefit from having client-side JavaScript application where you just click around and everything is snappy and everything is there and everything is interactive. That's nice, but the initial render comes from the server. So the first render happens on the server, and then the client-side JavaScript application takes over, hydrates the dry HTML into framework land. That's where the hydration part comes in. And then you work with your JavaScript framework. So that's how you get a quick first load. You get good performance, and then the whole JavaScript can trickle in over time, and whoop, everything becomes a JavaScript app afterwards. And Angular Universal is one of those tools that make that happen. Or you have React on the server side. So the term hydration comes from the React community. And since with React you write components in this JSX syntax, most of the things that you do is nesting function calls. What you render with that is up to you. It can be rendered to a string and then send it out to as HTML over the wire. You can create the virtual DOM like React does, or I created a small library that just calls to the DOM directly, and you have a nice way of writing UIs in JavaScript that you hadn't before. And this is the hydration part. And with that, with that hydration part, that you have a static site at first that becomes a JavaScript that, whoops, sorry, wrong direction. The pendulum swings into that, back to the server. You end up with the Jamstack. And I spoke a lot about Jamstack 2 years ago at the Global Azure Bootcamp. This has been one of my major topics over the last 2 or 3 years, and I'm still very convinced that this is a fantastic architecture. I don't know if you've been to Manfred Steyer's talk today, but he spoke also a lot about Azure Static Web Apps and Angular on top of that. And Azure Static Web Apps is Azure's answer to the Jamstack. And what you get is basically what if you don't have to render everything through a server, but on build. So everything that can be statically rendered, you render on build, and you put all those HTML files in a blob storage. This is the one storage here in the middle. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, static resources, and you get the same thing back from front page days, from the very first days where you just had assembled a couple of pages, statically generated sites, put it up on a server, and that's everything you get. And that's the simplest server that you can have. If you have a JavaScript framework, you can hydrate the whole thing. Then it becomes a client-side application. And with small functions, like Azure Functions or Lambdas is also a name that is used very often, you can add some dynamic to it, some dynamic behavior, like again those JSON outputs, and have some widgets there, and make it fancy. So this is nice because it can happen on any cloud technology out there, any cloud provider out there, and it works just beautifully. So it's still one of my most favorite architectures. But still there's a little bit missing, and to me that's sometimes you need server-side rendered stuff. So sometimes even if you generate all those things, and if they are robust, and if you can enhance them later on, sometimes you have cases where you need to have server-side information, either on an entire page or just in a couple of bits and pieces there, like a widget or whatnot. And I would argue even for a news site, news sites having those articles statically rendered is a very reasonable thing. That's something that you can definitely do. But the main page where you have stock analysis, like stock charts or just the most recent articles that are getting updated regularly, you just can't wait on builds. They need to be there almost immediately. And this is where you have to connect to a database again, where you have to produce static HTML, because you don't want to get an old version that you then update with the new data from your CMS on the client side. So you run into the same problems. You want to have that server-side rendered. And you don't want to maintain an entire server just for that. That's ridiculous. So you want to have the same benefits that you get from functions. You want to have this only run when you need it to, have a defined start and an end. Just pay for the time they actually produce something, not for something else. Be isolated, be resilient. If one of those functions crashes, who cares? It just doesn't matter. And you want that. And this is something that we definitely can achieve. And this is what I want to show you today. So I have to reshare my screen. I'm very sorry for that, but after sharing my screen, the whole page turns black. And just that you can see a little bit more, I'm going to stop my camera and I reshare my screen. You can still hear me, I guess. There you go. And alrighty, we're live again. Okay, cool. So you should see Visual Studio Code now. All right, and I'm already giving away way too much. Let's go into the terminal. This is, if anything fails, we are going to be here. Let's open another. Let's open another folder. Whoops, sorry. And we start a new function there. So Visual Studio Code reboots. We go into the terminal. Type func init. So with that, we start a new function app. We want to write it in Node because Node is beautiful, but we want to write it in TypeScript. And TypeScript is important for that. Because I think TypeScript might be the only tooling that you need for JavaScript anymore. Maybe an additional bundler, but if you want to write modern JavaScript, if you want to write JavaScript that can be, if you like, can be statically typed. If you want to write it for any target possible, if you want to have the latest features from the ECMAScript committee, TypeScript is the tool for you. You don't need anything else. But what we need, and we don't get that with the standard function template, we want to have the latest TypeScript version, and here's just some version 3. Something or so. Alrighty. And what I also want to install is, that's a dependency, a little tool called template.jsx, and I get to that in just a second. Let's do a complete install of all the rest of the dependencies. Template.jsx is a little tool created by Alvin, who is a student, 13 years of age, somewhere around here in Linz and surroundings, who thought all those template libraries that are in Node.js are super boring and not like he wants to write server-side code. So what he created is a small function wrapper where you are able to write JSX in TypeScript, in Node, and compile it to something that can be rendered server-side. So basically a string renderer. And I had the privilege to work with Alvin on that. And Alvin is 13 years old and he's a whiz kid. He's fantastic. So what he did there is just ridiculous. It's amazing. Alrighty. And I want to show it to you. So what I do, I create a new function. I call this function, it's an HTTP trigger. So HTTP is the one thing that I want to work with. And I call it index because this is my index page. It creates all of that. It creates a TypeScript file that you have here. That's the TypeScript file. I'm going to, the response message, I'm going to remove that. I'm just sending an empty string for now, or a string with that. That's totally okay. And then I'm going to call npm start. So I'm starting a dev server. That's nice. hiding my terminal a little bit so you can see more, and going into the node module for, where are we, template JSX, there you go. Because here's the README, and what, and what Elvin provides me with is the one little snippet that I need to copy to make the whole thing work. So as a TypeScript is the only tool that you need, and it even is able to compile a React style JSX. So you have the possibility to write JSX just like you're used to from React. TypeScript will compile it to the right function calls, and you can override those factory functions. So instead of calling react.createElement and react.fragment, I can call JSX template or template JSX, the one thing from Elvin for that. And this is brilliant. All right, let's save the config. I also have to rename my index file to index.tsx, and I start importing a couple of things. So import, well, everything as well as, no, just that for now. From template JSX, that should work. Okay. So when I start this function right now, so it should be available already, and I go to my server, I have something localhost 77.1 API index that should provide response message, just a plain text. So it's just the text response message, and I want to do a little bit more. I want to create some nice HTML pages, and I do that by creating a new app and just writing, well, HTML, just right there in TypeScript, just like that. I say, okay, hello, and let's put in the name. So either I get the name through a request, and if I don't have one, just say world. That should do it. I can then use JSXT to render this application, and if I hover over it, I see it produces a string. Okay, so let's see that as a body. Very good. One thing that I have to change as well is I have to send a couple of headers with it. Headers. Is it headers or is it header? We are going to see. And the header that I need to send is content type. It's text/HTML. So we need that so the browser understands how to interpret this response. So, okay, so let's see. Hello world, we are there. That's great. And I also can add a name. Hello Stefan. Great. Hello Global Azure Bootcamp. There we are. So wow, this works. This is fantastic. So this is what Elvin's library does, template JSX. And again, it's just right there, writing a little bit of XML directly in my file. And let's create a new folder, for example, components. And this is the composability part, nav.tsx. I include the same thing as well. And say, okay, export function called navigation, right? And I have a couple of navigation items, nav items, it's an array, and I have an URL called home. I have, well, I call it hello cheap. Getting to that. Getting to that in a second. JP, right? They have hello Stefan. Nav items. Here I have a nav where I return a nav element. So again, HTML in my TypeScript. I have an URL, and let's take those nav items and map each element to a list item. Link. Ref is l.url. Here we have l.title. That should do it for now. I import nav here in my main page. Components nav. There you go. And so what I'm doing now here is this just sends this H1. So but I want to have a excuse me. But what I want to have is an entire web page, with doc type and title and whatnot. And Elvin's software gives me also an HTML page. So this creates the entire fragment that I need to start an HTML page, where I just write the body. So this is only the body anymore. And I can also, enter the nav element here. That's okay. And I also can say, okay, there's the head, j6t.head, which means that I can populate the head element of my HTML page with more content. Hello. So this the same thing here. And what I get is, the entire thing. I get an entire HTML page with doc type, with HTML tag, body tag, head tag, title tag, everything that I need to make it valid HTML. I can populate the head tag and I can assemble components. And this is all I need to write to get some valid full HTML with flexible components inside a function. And with that, we go back, funnily enough, to what we had originally with PHP. You can write it where you are. You have isolated processes because it's just a function. And if something fails there, don't worry, because all the others still work. So it's not that you bring down your entire server. You just bring down this one little piece, this one flip that might vary you. Okay, so there we go. There's the navigation. We can see that already. I have somewhere a semicolon. But if I click on view page source, I also see, okay, I get the entire thing. Doc type, HTML head, everything that I need. So this is exactly what I want. Still, what I don't like, that everything is under /API/index. So this is not how I imagine a server-side rendered app. This is an API. This is, the default for an HTTP trigger. But here we can help ourselves with something else, with proxies. Just copy a file that I have prepared earlier. Proxies.json, and I also overwrite JSX template my local settings. And with proxies.json, I can do the nice thing is there. This is when I start this function app. These are all files that I deploy on Azure through a deployment command, and that's nice for several reasons. For me, it mostly means that I'm able to manage a lot of bits and pieces from the infrastructure in basically one project, and Azure figures it out what to do. And this proxies.json, what I do there is I create a couple of proxies. One is the index proxy, where I have this route / so my main route, where I now just reach a default page from Azure Functions, where I say, okay, take this and forward it to my backend host. This is a variable that I set here in local settings for local development. Not only for local development in local settings, but I also have configured my application online with that. Okay. And I have this backend host, which is now localhost 7071. It is going to be replaced with a real URL once I deploy it. And I say, okay, forward it to API index. I also create the route /hello/name. This is also a placeholder, and I forward it to /API index name is name. So that's the same route, but but with an argument. And if I run it again, npm start, and this is nice, it's basically like my Apache config back then. So I have this Apache config, now it's proxys.json, and then I have my PHP files, but they are functions, and you kind of get the same, but with all the benefits that you have from writing React code, because this is an F component that can easily render just the same in React. There's nothing that prevents it from being rendered in React just the same. And here I render a string and I send a string, but I can take the same components, the same structure, everything that I have here, and write client-side code with it as well. Okay, I see I have all the proxies set up. So if I now go to localhost 77.1, there you go, I have the same application again, and I can click on those links. I get nice /hello/gap links, and it works just as we are used to. Even here with Stefan, same thing, works perfectly well. So I have set everything up that I could. And now comes the one thing that always fails when you have a live presentation. I want to put it up to Azure. Alrighty, that's why I save func Azure function app publish hello functions GB. Okay, this is my publish command. I created a hello functions app already, so this exists. I just want to deploy it to Azure. May the demo gods be with me. Let's see what happens. Getting site publishing info. Okay, that looks reasonably fast enough. As again, I'm on the countryside. I'm there with an LTE connection. I'm really happy for everything that I get through, and I'm especially happy that you can still follow me. Okay, uploading it. While this is uploading, deployment completed successfully. I just want to go back to this graph of serverless rendering. So we have front-end tools. We render on the server side inside a function. We use what we need. We pay on consumption. They are isolated. They are resilient. They're robust, and we give the users just what they need. So sometimes you need server-side rendered routes, and with that you can use the same thing that you use on your client sides, the same components, the same structure, but render just this one particular page slightly different. All right, and now it should be over. It's syncing triggers. Okay, while this deploys, let's go over to, yeah, of course. I'm sorry, maybe I'm not logged in Azure. But what I can tell you is it worked when I tried it out. So there is the, oh. I ruined it now. I'm very sorry. That's the demo words in it. So func. Let's try it there as well. Maybe I forgot something. But let's go over to something different in the meantime. So what you see here is, and I had this earlier. Please focus on the left side here. That's Next. That's Next.js. This is one of my most favorite Jamstack tools, and this takes the whole thing a little bit further. You have also pages like this index page. So this is a blog, npm run dev. Let's start the dev process. I'm sorry. npm run dev. There we are. Okay. This just starts a block, and I prepared it already on localhost 3000. This is a block, and there you go. My global Azure block, a couple of block entries to static generation versus server-side generation, back to home. This is also something that creates a static page, and the JavaScript framework React takes over, and I can click through it and have just the same experience, just sending the delta, just the one little bit, and I'm browsing through. And how Next.js does it is by having those files like index.tsx, which is the index page, and I again have a layout, I have a head. It's just the same thing that I just showed you, and a couple of HTML files there. And I have get static props, and with get static props, I can pre-fill this page with data. And get static props means that it's going to be pre-filled on build time. So this is stuff that is going to be pre-filled on build time. I have also something for posts. So this is the page for each post where I can, with the bracket ID, I can create beautiful links just for those post IDs. This does the same thing. It generates static pages. They are going to be hydrated on the client side, and then you have a JavaScript application. But what it does, which is actually very nice, is if I have a reason to write server-side code, everything that I need to do is change get static props to get server-side props, or get initial props, and suddenly this becomes a server-side rendered page in a function. So if I say npm run build, I guess it's npm build, yeah. What you can see here, it kicks off the optimized production build. It's going to take a little while. I generate static pages, but what you can see here is I have an API that runs in a function. I have a route that runs in a function. Those posts, they are static. That's why you get this bubble here, this pink bubble. But my index page, again, where's my index page? There's my index page. My index page is, again, a function. This is what the little lambda denotes. And it creates those optimized bits and pieces for me that then work on my function host. Okay, I have one tool for that. That's called Jetzt. No deploy is the right thing. I don't want to deploy it to Azure right now because apparently this doesn't work. It does the entire thing. It tells me what there's a lambda, what's static, what's server-side generated or statically generated. And then it does the entire Azure stuff. And it creates the function app. Everything happens in this package. And what you can see here is you again have Azure Functions. So you have the Azure Function bindings. You have an index file, which is the actual page where you have all the rendering that is necessary to create this page in React. It's a lot. There's a lot of bundling in there. Don't underestimate that. And you have also this small wrapper that wraps an Azure Function handler to this particular file. All right, and you just get the same out of it, and it's optimized. It's optimized for just the case that you have, just for the one case that you use. All right, so this is this part. We have serverless rendering when we need it. We have static rendering when we need it, and we have hydration, so we get a unique experience, and we just fetch the data, that we need. That's I would say that this status quo. This can run on Vercel, who created Next.js, but this runs also very well on Azure because there are wrappers and tools for it to do that. This is a fantastic solution. I would say this is the status quo. This is how you should structure apps right now. The right tool for the job, even if it's serverless rendering, static rendering, or if you just are entirely on the client side, this is what you want to have. Exactly, and the nice thing is that for you it becomes ubiquitous what you're doing. You just write apps. You just write React apps. The framework does the right thing for you. And I think, and this is the last thing that I want to show you, we can go even further, and we can go even further with server components. And it's also an application that I already presented. That's a notes app. I write a new note. Hello world to hello global bootcamp. Hi from my notes app. This is also a React app. And I think you've seen it's just a regular notes-taking app. There are a couple of client-side things in there. You couldn't tell which parts of that have been rendered on the server side or on the client side. With React server-side components or server components, I have the possibility to define it on a component level. So if you think of a React application just being some assembling or composition of components, you can decide per component where you want to have it rendered. For example, this is my node list. It renders on the server, which means everything that is happening here, like this database query. So I'm executing a database query there directly from Postgres. This does not get to the client side, but it runs in a function. It compiles some HTML updates that are going to be sent on the client side the moment I need it. And what's particularly nice about that, and I guess, where do I use the edit button? Let's go to a node itself. So you have this one node. It's also rendered on the server because it again needs some data from a database. But it has an edit button and a node preview. And the edit button, what does it do? It changes the state of the entire node of this node preview. Those are the edit button definitely is a client-side component. So this can only happen on the client side. And you decide where this component should live and where this component should work. And with that, you can define the right rendering location, not only on a page level, but also on a component level, getting the best out of it and having the right tool for the right job. And if I look at, let's restart it and go into the dev tools. I rerun it. If I look at the network, there are a couple of client-side files, the classical React thing that you get. But the moment I click on the Hello Global Azure Bootcamp node, I get a server-side component. And if I look at that, I just get the delta, just the one thing that React needs to update this view, a pre-compiled virtual DOM update that is just going to be applied. This is minimal. So this is just 4 kilobyte uncheat zip because I don't have cheat zip running there. Just sending the update. And still this edit button here, this edit button gives me, is on the client side. And you see, I need some client side things for that. I also get one server side response for that, which is maybe the update, but also a couple of client side scripts just for that. And this is, I guess, the peak that we are going to reach at one point, where with what we do, we don't have to think anymore about where we do it. The framework is going to decide that for us. There we are, server-side components. So we have all of the Next.js model, but we decide on a component level if it should render on a client or server or both. That can happen as well. The frameworks are going to decide for that. We have full control, and I think functions and TypeScript are a way to do that. So especially with serverless and Azure Functions or equivalents, this is the way to do so. Alrighty. Again, the line between server and client will be blurry. Finally, I think the pendulum has come into the middle, where we use exactly the right tool for what we need, not something, we are not bound to one side or the other or try to get the mix between those two. No, it happens where it should happen. And through those composition model, we are able to compose the UI again in the backend. And with that, I want to say, first, render where it needs to. I give you a couple of resources. I put them all into Discord. I want to say, give a big shout out to Elvin, who has worked a lot on this fantastic template JSX that I'm now going to use for all my server rendered applications. If you want to read more about TypeScript, check out my book, typescript.book.com. And if you know what the intro animation referred to, just write it to me in Discord. And I'm going to, if you are around the Linz area, I'm going to refer one of my books for you, like a printed book. If you are not around the Linz area, but in Austria, I might be able to send it to you. So write it into Discord. And with that, I want to say thank you. I guess I used every little minute of my available time. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day. Go watch some sessions, and thank you very much for the invitation. Bye-bye.